Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well and that you're having a good start to the week. It's Monday, so we're going to do a Rashi from the second Aliyah. Actually, we're going to do two Rashis. Sometimes our Rashis are a little more philosophical, sometimes a little more technical, sometimes a little more etymological. So I wanted to show you an etymological Rashi and then just a famous Rashi, which is good to contemplate, even though we've seen it before. So we're talking about, of course, Yaakov's journey back to the land of Canaan, the preparation for his encounter with Esav, which he's afraid of and which he's anticipating. Not sure exactly how it'll go. He's preparing in three ways: preparing for war, preparing for appeasement, and preparing through tefillah, as we know, preparing in all three manners at the same time to make sure that one of those tactics at least would work. So one of the interesting phrases here, he says, he tells them how to go and how to approach Esav and with all the gifts that they're bringing for him. V'amartem gam hinei avdecha Yaakov acharenu. You're supposed to say to Esav that our servant Yaakov is coming after us. He's also on his way. Ki amar achapra panav bamincha. And he's saying, meaning the servants or the first people to greet Esav are saying in the name of Yaakov, achapra panav bamincha. I want to be achapra panav. We'll come back to what that means. Bamincha, with the gifts. So what exactly is this phrase, achapra panav bamincha? So we understand through the context of the pasuk that what it means is appeasement. We hope that he's going to be appeased somehow or mollified through these gifts. But how does that fit into the words achapra panav? Achapra, of course, comes from the word kaper, lechaper, like Yom HaKippurim. Kapara, atonement of some sort. So what does atonement here have to do with mincha? So Rashi first just translates this kind of in the context of the pasuk, like we did. Achapra panav avatel rogzea. Achapra panav here means I'm going to negate his anger. Ki amar achapra panav b'mincha. I'm going to negate his anger through these gifts. I'm going to mollify him. I'm going to appease him through these gifts. It's interesting that Rashi does that. Before ever explaining the words achapra panav, he explains what they mean in the context of the pasuk, which was our gut reaction as well. And the reason I think for that, why Rashi goes to that before ever explaining the etymology of the word, even though that's what's perplexing him over here, is because it's not altogether clear how the very clear meaning of these words in the pasuk fits with the etymology of what we know about this word from elsewhere. Right? Elsewhere, the most common word of this use of this word is something to do with atonement, and atonement doesn't really fit in this pasuk. So he right away jumps in avatel rogzeh. I'm going to negate the anger through the gifts, and then he goes to explain why that has to do with kapara. V'nira be'enai shekol kapara she'etzel avon v'chet ve'etzel panim. Anytime the word kaper or kapara is used in the context of sin, like atonement from sin, Yom HaKippurim, a korban that is brought lekapara for atonement, or it's used in the context of panim, right here, like achapra panav, I'm going to do kapara to his face. So anytime it's used in those two contexts, what it means, kulan lashon kinuach v'ha'avarahem. It's all meaning to clean away, to wipe away. And that makes sense. When we're talking about atonement, bringing a korban to atone for something, you're hoping that the atonement of the korban will wipe away the sin. Yom HaKippurim wipes away our sins, wipes away our past, makes a clean slate. So there's an idea of wiping away, of cleaning, of taking away, of removal that has to do with kapara. By the way, kapara could also mean to cover, which is the same idea. If something is exposed and then you cover it, it's as if it's not there. It's as if it's wiped away. So kapara, Rashi doesn't mention this here, but could mean either to cover over or to wipe away, both with the same end result, which is that you don't see that which was there before. So in the context here of the pasuk, panav bamincha, what it means is I'm going to wipe away his anger through the mincha, through the gift, through the appeasement and the atonement that I'm bringing, not the atonement, the appeasement that I'm bringing over here through these gifts. He points out also that this is used in different contexts. It's used in the Gemara, and it's used in Tanakh, and it's always used in the same way. Lashon aramihu harbe b'Talmud. The Gemara uses this word kaper, not in terms of atonement, but in terms of cleaning away and wiping away many times. Gives one example here, two examples. First one is from Baba Metzia. The kapar yade beglima de chavre. The Gemara is telling a story there about Mitzia Chaf Daled, about one of the Amoraim who wiped his hands on the cloak. He washed his hands, and he wanted to wipe them. He wiped them on the cloak of one of his friends. The kaper yade, he was kaper, his hands, beglima de chavre, on the cloak of his friend. So what does kaper mean? He didn't atone his hands in the cloak of his friend. Here, of course, it means lahavir, to take away, to wipe off, to wipe clean. He had water on his hands, and he used the glima de chavre lechaper, for kapara. Kapara here means, again, to wipe away, to clean. So that's one example of it. Then he brings from Ezra a little more harder example of where it's used in Tanakh in the way that we're using it here. Most of the time in Tanakh, again, it's used for the simple application, which is atonement, which at its root is to wipe away. But in the simple meaning of the pasuk, of the psukim, it means atonement. But in Tanakh, do we ever see it used in terms of wiping away? It's a bit of a stretch, but Rashi says, Gam b'lashon hamikra nikraim hamizrakim shel kodesh kipurei zahav. Some of the bowls that are used in the Beis Hamikdash are called mizrakim. Mizrak echad kesef, mizrakei zahav, whatever. So in Ezra, they're not called mizrakim. They're called kipurei zahav. It's very clear that they're referring to these vessels, these bowls that were used, mizrakim. But in Ezra, it's called kipurei zahav. Again, kaper, the same word, the same etymology. Why? That's a little harder. It's not for atonement, really, and it's not really wiping away. So he says, Al Shem Shehakohen, why is the bowl called Kippur, which is to wipe away or to clean? Al Shem Shehakohen Mekaneach Yadav Bisfas HaMizrach. Why? Because the Kohen wipes his hands on the side of the bowl. So here, Kapara, Kippurei Zahav, is used for wiping away again. So he's giving a guess as to what the word means in the Pasuk. Then he's telling us the etymology, which usually you think of Kapara as atonement, is very fitting here because it all has to do with the root of kaper, which is to wipe away and clean. That's what it means in our pasuk. That's what it means sometimes in Shas, when it's used kaper, not in the atonement sense, but as a wiping away. And he even finds a far-fetched example in Tanakh, where kaper is used not for atonement, but for wiping away as well. So I think it's a very interesting Rashi. Sheds a little bit of insight into how his brain worked, how he's trying to associate various words throughout the Tanakh, both in terms of their simple meaning and application, but also the root of their meaning, which then allows you to apply the words in multiple places. It's the beauty of the Hebrew language, that one word can mean something at its root, but then be applied in such different circumstances, and then translated differently in each of those contexts. Kapara, in the normal context, we translate as atonement. Over here, we translate as something else, but all of it has to do with the root of that word, which really means to wipe away. Before I leave you with all those technicalities and words, just another Rashi, as Yaakov goes ahead and splits his camp, and he seems to pass his entire camp over, he transfers everything over Ma'avar Yabok to the other side of the river. Vayevaser, says the pasuk, Vayevaser Yaakov levado vayeavek ish imo ad alos hashachar. Yaakov is left alone. Very famous, very important pasuk. It was the subject of my drasha for Yom Kippur this year. Usually would have said, if you missed it, you missed it. This year you can look at it again because it was recorded on Zoom. But Vayevaser Yaakov levado, he's left alone. So the question is, why is he left alone after he's transferring everything over? Everything is gone. He takes all of his family and passes them over. He takes everything and passes it over. What was he doing left on the other side of the river all by himself? Rashi, of course, tells us based on Chazal, Shachach pachim ketanim v'chazar aleim. He forgot small jars and he went back to get them. The reason I'm pointing it out is not just because it's a famous Rashi and an important one and a nice one. There's so many questions on this pasuk and on the Rashi, which I won't go into now because I know we're out of time. But I just want to show you, because we're doing Rashis here, how interesting this Rashi is. Rashi is clearly paraphrasing Chazal over here, the Gemara. The Gemara does not say Shachach pachim ketanim. It says Nishtayer al pachim ketanim. Yaakov was left on that side of the river to collect the small jars. Rashi, I have to assume, knew that Gemara very well and changes the language of the Gemara. He doesn't say Nishtayer, he remained for the jars. He says Shachach pachim v'chazar aleim. He goes back for the jars. Remaining somewhere to collect the jars after he pushes everyone to the other side of the river is different than what Rashi is saying is he went with them and Chazar, he came back for them, which changes the whole meaning of the story. One has to contemplate a little bit more why Rashi here deviated from Chazal. Was it something in the story that didn't fit with Chazal's reading, or was it just a mistake in a girsa? Perhaps he had a different version of the Gemara, or whatever it was. But I just wanted to point out, it's fascinating, just a lesson, that Rashi doesn't always quote the Mamrei Chazal, even though most of the Rashis always say, oh, this is based on a Medrash, based on a Chazal, based on a Gemara. Yes, most of the time quoted 100%, or at least paraphrased 100%, but here he changes the meaning quite a bit, and he often does that. It's important to understand a little bit more about why Rashi does this in various contexts. Have a great day, everybody.